Welcome, everybody, to Cosmic Divide episode 3. I am joined once again by my good friend TMV, and we're going to be bringing you a show that is all about roster moves. We've got most of the teams have been confirmed and announced. We've seen some pretty cool announcement videos, wouldn't you say? And we're going to be going over the rosters, but we're not going to necessarily be doing your classic power ranking. In this video, this podcast, we are going to be talking about the moves that were made. So we're going to be rating the GMs and the managers of the teams who did the best job forming the best franchise team as we head into 2023. Welcome, TMV. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Pretty excited. I think this is going to be an interesting exercise to think about. Where these teams were, how they've improved. I think it's gonna be fun, and I'm interested to hear your takes on some of these rosters. Obviously, we'll have different levels of familiarity with the different teams, so it's gonna be interesting. I think for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to rely on your expertise for I think quite a bit of the European stuff, just
Mm,
because I mostly focus on the Pacific or the EMEA or not the EMEA, the SEA teams, Pacific teams, and North America.
mm,
So I'll definitely let you take the reins a lot on the EMEA stuff. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see like where they came from and where they are now.
mm.
So let's just go ahead and hop into it. We're going to start in EMEA.
Mhm.
And we're going to start with Team Vitality. So the current roster for Vitality is, if I'm not mistaken, Bone Cold, Mulsey, Destrian, Twiston, and Sender. And then I think it's also worth adding in like the coaching staff if
Mhm.
it's confirmed and available. So they have Sala, Strong, and Gorilla as their three coaches,
Mhm.
with Sala being the head coach. What do you think about this Vitality team?
So I think that this Vitality team, and I'd be interested to hear like what. In fact, tell me what do you think? Just give me like a very quick initial impression. How well do you think this team would do? Where would you rate them in terms of like out of 10 of the EMEA teams? If you had to guess right now.
I think I'd probably put them in the top half.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because I think I'll just give you like my very
Yeah.
basic take on it, and then you can just kind of take it away. I think they did the right thing when forming this team for franchising. They went out and they got a coach who brought along an assistant coach. So Sala and I believe Strong are both from OG London United. Yeah,
Mm,
the two of them are from
yeah.
OG London United. They also brought a couple of players over from OG London United.
Hmm.
Mulsey and Destrian, I
Yep.
think, are the two.
Yep.
And then they're adding that to the core of Bone Cold and Sender, who were originally on Vitality, and then they brought in sort of like this up and coming superstar Twiston from Big. And so I think
Yeah.
that particular type of roster construction is really, really strong because you start out with like the structure of the coach. You add it to existing structure with an IGL and a secondary player who have chemistry already. You bring in two other players with chemistry, and then you go out and you get your sort of like superstar duelists who can kind of function on their own a lot of the time, but will also be a lot easier to slot in than trying to like take five players who have never played together and put them together and hope it works.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like, I think a lot of people maybe outside of EMEA will look at this team and be like, I know Bone Cold from old Acend. I think I remember watching Twiston play for Big once, and then they'll be like, who I don't really know if this team's good or not. But to me, this is like, as you said, in terms of like, sure, they're not going to be, I don't think, in like the very, very, very big leagues, but I think as a team, just a really solid way, as you mentioned, of building a roster. You've got a coaching staff that's familiar with some of the players already. You've got Bone Cold and Sender who are already familiar. So really, it's only Twiston who has to like completely kind of, come to a completely new system and into a completely new team, and everyone else has some familiarity with what's going to be going on. I think that this team has quite a bit of talent as well. I think Molsey is a really really good player, and I think Twiston is, like as you said, like a superstar talent level player. And so they've got talent. The only thing I would say roster construction wise that I was like scratching my head at for Vitality was they let go of Batty G,
Hmm.
who was the sub for FPX when they won in stage one, and they couldn't go to Iceland, but they won that stage with Batty G coming in as a sub, and he played well for Vitality, I thought at least, and so I was a bit shocked that they let go of a guy who I thought is clearly like a tier one player and has played at that
Right.
level and shown himself at that level. So I was surprised by that, but otherwise, big props to whoever built this Vitality roster, because I think this is, as you say, I think this is a top 5 team in EMEA, and the type of team that, if things go right, could like truly compete. If things start to go well for them. So I'm big on. I think I'm higher on Vitality than probably most people are.
That's good to hear. I think their roles also work out relatively well. I know that some teams took the approach of just kind of like throwing a wide net for like
Let's just
all of
get
the
5
duelist players.
Yeah.
Yeah. But these guys seem to be relatively in the roles that they're supposed to be in, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And also, I think maybe that even gives them a bit of a leg up as far as, when the season starts. I think we're going to see some teams that maybe start out a little awkward and then maybe grow into their team. But I feel like these guys could really hit the ground running, and probably take some people by surprise, just because it might sound weird, like, oh, Team Vitality, this huge like Counter-Strike org, taking people by surprise in attack shooter. But I don't really feel like a lot of people are looking at Vitality in EMEA right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to put it, because we do have a lot of teams to get through. So let's not make sure we're not here forever. Let's move on to Team Liquid, who obviously will be one of the heavy hitters. Their roster of Safe, Yampy, Soulcast, Redgar, and Nats. They also had perhaps the best reveal video of them all. Not sure if you saw it, but it was really cool. And Emil is still the coach as well, who is Doomrose's twin brother, which is always funny to think about. The twin brothers are on 2 of the most competitive teams in EMEA now, which will be fun. But this roster, I mean, I don't need to explain to anyone who follows Pro Valorant at all, that this roster is just on the level insane. Talent-wise, you could argue that this is like the best team out of any of them, like in terms of just the actual individual talent on the team. It is crazy. Now, you talked about roles. It's going to be interesting. I'm kind of interested to see what they will do with roles on this team, because there is some question marks, maybe, particularly like, and I think this will be a question going forward for a lot of teams potentially, if Chamber does get like a big nerf, and like isn't the meta anymore. Some of these teams, I think, are going to struggle a bit with that, and finding their roles, and Liquid might be one of those teams where it's like, I know obviously like Nats could play Cypher or whatever, and obviously that'll be fine, but what then does Yampy play, right? What is Safe your duelist, and if so, what's Yampy playing, like, and who's playing Smokes, if that's the case, right? Like, there is some questions here role wise, but I think in terms of talent, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, totally. It definitely will be interesting. The roles is my biggest hesitation with this team. I mean, I again, I think they're going to be in that top half. Arguably, might be the favorite. I don't know. Maybe they do have Nas, they do have Redgar, and then they have this very strong core from the Liquid team plus Safe, who was probably far and away the most impressive player in EMEA last year that was not on a franchise team currently. Like, his performance on Guild was incredible. But I do agree that it's going to be interesting, like, who's going to be the main operator. Is it going to be Safe? Is it going to be Yampy? Is it going to be both of them? Are they going to run the dual op setup that we thought they were going to run with Navera?
Triple
and then
with Nats,
really.
but got Nats, and he was playing Chamber at the end.
Yeah, I think that was just sort of like they needed somebody more consistent to play there. I assume Nats will go back to sort of being like the Viper Cypher Killjoy role, but then Yampy plays Killjoy. My one question about this roster, aside from the roles, is Soulcast, honestly. And I've kind of been a little bit of a Soulcast hater for like the entirety of his time on Liquid. I just feel like he has incredible aim. He's got one of the best initiators in terms of his utility usage, but I've always just sort of questioned his ability to win big games. There's like, the infamous knife moment, and then it just seems like Liquid was never quite able to get over that hump in these big tournaments. And whether that was an IGL or a structure problem or individual player problem, I think it is interesting that they kept Soulcast and Yampy over some of the other players that were also very talented. Although I'd assume that like Scream and Navera were kind of a package deal and that kind of thing. So either way, I think the roster construction for Liquid, obviously you go out and you get 2 incredibly superstar free agents from the old Gambit roster. You bring in high-powered, safe as well. I think they did a good job. I am a little concerned about the roles, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly defend Soulcast as a fellow Brit.
Go for it.
That I think if Soulcast wasn't on this roster, I would be panicking about the roles because Soulcast has played a lot of stuff. I mean, I think he's played literally pretty much every role in this game at one point or another. They have asked him to do pretty much everything, and so he like eases my concerns about roles a bit because if the others can't make it work, Soulcast probably will be the player who like takes one for the team and plays something that might not be his best role. So he's like helping me with the roles, and I do think I agree with you that he can be. I think he's a bit of a confidence player, and that leads to maybe some inconsistencies where he's not feeling as confident. He can, not perform that well, but when he's on it, he can be performed really well. And Team Liquid, I think with this roster, will be looking to win tournaments. Not just go. They'll be looking to win. I think with this roster, and so yeah, that could be a problem if they are being a bit inconsistent. With members like Soulcast and even Yampy at sometimes I think can be inconsistent as well. But I just think I look at this team and I just think, yeah, whoever was building the Liquid team was like, I want to win tournaments. Who can we get to win tournaments? And I think this was a really good position from where they were.
Right, and they finally solved the biggest issue they had for their entire existence, which is rock solid IGLing. They go out and get Redgar, who is still in that conversation as best IGL in the world. I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Koi, a new org from Spain with a huge amount of hype behind them. They have, I think, the biggest Twitch streamer in the world, arguably, is the owner. And they have put together a pretty interesting squad. So Koi went out and they picked up, I'm going to have to reference this sheet right now. They went out and they picked up Trex, Darso, Shados, Holdamenta, and Wolfen. They have Barbar as their coach, and Gokt, I guess, is the assistant coach as far as the spreadsheet confirms. What do you think about the Koi roster?
This one I think is really interesting again, and I think honestly, from where Koi were and with their old roster, which is maybe a bit more of a tier 2 roster, they did have Magnum from old Fnatic, but other than that, we're looking at names that haven't really performed maybe the top level, some decent players, but nothing like incredible. So they just went out with the whole let's just scrap it down, build a new roster, and they have just brought in people from different areas. You do have Coldamenta and Trex and Barber, obviously the coach, all from the old guild. And that's I think a good pickup there. Obviously Starkso and Shados have played very, very high levels at the game, the highest levels at the game, and won tournaments, both of them. And then you've got Wolfen, who will be like the unknown. And Wolfen probably, assuming if Chamber doesn't get nerfed, he will be playing the Chamber role. And that might surprise a lot of people. Who's this guy? He did play in the VRL tournament for Kase, and he unbelievably popped off at the start of that tournament. Like just god, he looked like a god, and I was genuinely like, who the hell is this guy? He looks like he's gonna go insane. Like why is he not playing for a top team? He cooled off during like the later parts of the tournament, but he really did look unbelievable, and I think he's got that in him, but it's just again like a consistency maybe issue. We'll have to see. I think that this is a team that honestly I could see going in a lot of different directions. They have the talent again. I think if everything kind of goes right for them, I wouldn't even be shocked if they like went on a very deep run. Made it to a final of like the Sao Paulo tournament, whatever. I legitimately think that is in the cards for them if everything goes right. But I think that there are, there might be some issues in terms of adding in new pieces. You've got Coldamenta and Trex who are familiar with each other, but everyone else is kind of coming completely in from the cold and they're having to build from scratch. So it could go a couple different ways. They have a lot of talent though, and I just think, again, there's quite a while before Sao Paulo. I think the talent is again unbelievable. I like Barbar as a coach. I like when he gets angry on the camera. And so yeah, I'm a believer in Koi. I've got to say, I feel it, this roster.
Cool. So I like the fact that obviously it's a Spanish org, right? And so I like the fact that they brought in a Spanish IGL. Coldamenta, very experienced and sort of that core ideas guy on the team along with Barbar. They have a huge amount of firepower. Okay. They've got Trex. You're saying Wolfen was sort of just raw firepower. Shados, maybe the best aimer from the old Gambit team in terms of just raw aim mechanics. Um, and then Starzo is obviously just like a super versatile, very explosive player from the old Acend roster. I'm a little concerned about who is going to have to kind of like take the hit and play the off roles just because they have all of this firepower. I mean, Coldamenta obviously is a supportive player. Um, and Shados has kind of played that flex and sort of support before. Starzo has played basically everything, but they are going to have to kind of make sure that everybody is in the right spot. And there is definitely some overlap in terms of the roles. I do agree that they certainly have the potential to be one of the most impressive teams just from like a raw talent perspective. I'm really curious to see just like how the team dynamics turn out for this one. We've got very strong opinions, I assume, from Barbar, Coldamenta. I know Starzo is a very vocal player. He kind of like took over the IGL role in Ascend for a while. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch. I don't actually know where to rank this team, but if you're excited about it, I could get on board with that.
I think one thing as well is knowing Starkso, I think is quite a that's good, a bit of a firecracker as a character. Obviously, we've got like the old guild coaching staff and Coldamenta as well from guild, the IGL. They played incredibly slow. Like they are the slowest team in the world. And so I'm interested to see how Starkso fits in to someone who wants to be like, guys, let's just sit and spawn for a minute. And Starkso's just there, like, twiddling his fingers, just like, can we go and run at them now?
Yeah, it's just sending it in on Sage or something like that. No, dude, it's not your role.
That's my only question. I'm excited for them.
Sweet. Okay, move on to Heretics. Tell me what you think about this roster.
So, this is one Heretics where I've been pretty high on all the other teams so far. This is one where I'm feeling like it's not bad, but I'm not as excited for it. You've got Mixwell. Mixwell's just one of them characters where it's like he was probably always gonna make franchising, but it's like I don't know. Obviously it's Mixwell. He's been around forever at this point. He never. I guess he kind of found a role on Chamber, but he's played a lot of like different stuff, and I guess he will again. But if Chamber gets nerfed, I guess Mixwell's probably playing Sentinels because they've got Kellogg's. And you get this reunion of Kellogg's and Mixwell when it was weird when they were at G2, and it was just kind of weird. And then you've got, Avova, I think I like as a player, but I don't know. I'm just not feeling like. I don't know. I just feels like I would put them a step below like the Vitalities and Kois, where I can kind of make a case for them, maybe even doing really really well. I'm just not sure that Heretics are really at that level where I feel like their ceiling is just a bit lower than all of those teams.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. From a pure roster move perspective, like if we're just judging the general manager, I love this team. And the reason for that is because, again, another Spanish org, they go out and get like the biggest name in Spanish Valorant, Mixwell. They go out and get Neilzinho, who has a lot of hype coming from working with FPX last year, I think.
Yeah.
They go out and get more G2 players. They pick up Avova. They pick up Kellogg's, who is on again, off again with that team. And then they go out and they get Zeke, who is, I think, probably one of the most flexible players in the game. And then they get Boo from OG London United, who had a very good second half of the season last year. Now, from a role perspective, I think that is where the questions arise. And so, as far as like the names they got, I think they did a pretty darn good job. Now, the roles, let's talk about this. Obviously, we've had Mixwell versus Kellogg's. I don't know, this is round 5 at this point, I suppose. Who's playing the Jet? Who's opping? Who's playing the Chamber? I don't know. I do agree. I think that Mixwell will probably fall back into that Sentinel role. I think that's kind of where he's at his best. He's not a very active player, and they need somebody who's just going to go in, and that's going to be Kellogg's most of the time. Boo and Avova, both smokes players. Mixwell also sort of a pseudo smokes player when he's playing the Viper. How does that all work out? Zeke will be able to fill whatever hole they need him to, but we'll see. This is definitely one of those rosters that could very easily be different within like two months. I would say.
I think a big thing of this is Zeke as well. Obviously, we haven't seen Zeke play in quite a while, so it's kind of a bit of a, if he's like a peak Zeke, then I feel like that bumps up the ceiling of where this team can be. But if it takes some time to get you back into it or whatever, and I could see them coming maybe out of the gates a bit slow. I just said people might be on new roles and whatnot. You've added in some different pieces again. Obviously, the G2 core is there, and Nielsen, I think, was the G2 coach. I'm not sure if the old guys there when he was there. Maybe they are familiar with each other. I don't quite know the timeline of that, but it's gonna be I just feel like there's more question marks with this team than I do for teams like Vitality or Koi, and I'd kind of lump those teams into kind of the same category of like where they were coming into it, right? Like teams that weren't tier 1 teams last year, or really at much of the point in Valorant, are now coming in and having to like build a roster. I just feel like Koi and Vitality, I just have a bit more faith in them, I think.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, and it is tough if you are a team that is like, obviously Heretics, they were like the team coming out of First Strike. They won First Strike and then they just completely disappeared from the scene, and now they're back. So they're trying to regain that glory. Where they were, 6 months ago to now, probably a pretty great improvement, but we don't actually know. Well, the only time will tell to see whether this roster can kind of get it together and figure it out. Okay. Let's move on to Not as Sincere, Navi, and
we don't need to spend too long on this one, I don't think.
No. What is there to say? You take probably the best team from EMEA all of last year, and Artist leaves, goes to North America. CNED comes in. Is that just like a purely 1-for-1 trade? Is it an upgrade? Is it a downgrade? What do you think?
I would say it's quite interesting actually, because again, like CNED, didn't perform as well obviously last year as he did before. So like a big looming question, I think, just overall with all of the scene is, if Chamber significantly gets nerfed, that is going to fundamentally change like a lot, I think. It might change other things in the meta as well, but for people like CNED who did really, really well on Jet and didn't do as well on Chamber, you might say that, well, if Chamber gets nerfed and we go back to a kind of more, you add in more Jet, maybe with still some Chamber, then that CNED might be an upgrade over Artis, because CNED was arguably the best Jet. But if Chamber doesn't get nerfed and we stick with full Chamber meta, then you might have said that CNED is a downgrade from Artis, from what we saw in the last year. So it's kind of hard to tell, but I think, look, if Artis was going to leave to NA, and obviously we don't know the specifics of why he made that decision or whatever, but if say he was going to leave whatever, I think CNED was probably about as good as Navi were going to get to fill that role. And that is basically all there is to it. And then they picked up the core and the coach of the best team. So good. Good job, Navi.
Yeah. As far as general manager work goes, Navi A+. I mean, you can't really think of any better way to upgrade their previous roster into the franchise.
Navi had good players as well, right? We're talking about Heretics, Koi, Vitality, who like weren't quite there. Navi, I think, could have easily gone down the road of like keeping a few of their players and trying to just build on top of that. But it's hard to argue with what they did.
Yeah, I mean, they had JD, Cloud, SSK. Like these are, they were pretty close to competing with Gambit last year in the CIS region as far as making it through to some of the tournaments. The one other thing I did want to mention about this team is I'm kind of interested to see how the personality difference works, because I mean, Artis is probably like the most bombastic player in all of Valorant, right?
That's
And
why
then
he
you go to
had to go to
CNED,
NA.
who's yeah, true. But then CNED is pretty like soft spoken, a little shy seemingly. Um, so how does that dynamic work with Angel being like this very kind of like outspoken, opinionated person?
Yeah.
And did Artist balance that with his own sort of personality? And will CNED just kind of like slot right in, like cog to the machine, or is he going to get kind of like overridden a little bit too much by Angel, whereas Angel was able to push, or Artist was able to push back? I don't know. It'll be interesting, but I definitely don't really have any doubts that this team is going to be top 2, top 3, I think, at the very least.
Yeah. It would be a shock if they weren't. Like, if they don't make like top 8 in Sao Paulo, that's going to be a massive shock. Because they just have a massive advantage of 4 of the players and the coach all know what they're doing already.
Yeah.
You know, they're just
All
building
their
off what they
protocols
already
are the
did. It's
same.
only one player who needs to like learn the stuff. Everyone else is going to be, or should be at least, you know, performing at the same level that they were before, which is already like one of the best teams in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's go over to France now for Karmine Corp. This is a very interesting roster. I don't know the. Obviously, I know the brothers of Scream and Avera, and both speak French, so it's not an issue that they're playing on a fully French team. But I'm not super familiar with XMS, Newsera, and Shin. Have you watched enough to kind of have a feel of how this team's going to do?
Have I watched enough to give like a fully fledged detailed opinion? Probably not. I have seen them all play before. And I think if we just go again from the kind of GM, like how did you construct the roster? If you wanted to build a French speaking roster, obviously the big like one that everyone's kind of going, but what about this guy? Is of course Enzo, who currently, as far as I know, isn't on a team, or definitely isn't on one of the, you know, tier 1 teams at least. So, and I think a lot of people, you know, kind of expected, oh, K-Corp are going to build a French speaking roster and they're going to bring in Enzo, obviously, because he's like the best. I mean, he's the best French player, you might say, right? With Scream and Navarra from Belgium. So it was kind of like that feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. It's kind of obviously with Scream and Navarra, you know what they are, what they bring. With the rest of the guys, I do think like obviously they have talent, but again, I'm like looking at it and I feel like could you have done maybe a bit better? Like, will they be fully competitive? I don't think they'll be like horrific. You know, I don't think they'll be like bad and you know like people laugh at them. I think you know they'll be competitive. I just don't think that they'll be you know quite as good as some of these other teams, like you know, in these kind of mid-table teams. I don't think they'll be like upper mid-table. I see them kind of as a lower mid-table team for where they are. And I think for me, like if we're talking about roster construction, the big sticking point for me is that you know you could have got Enzo for this team, and that would have been pretty sick. And I think we'd all be pretty hyped, like you know, with the addition of Enzo. But without, it just feels like it's missing what it could be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I also am looking at the players and their roles again. It's like, is Scream the IGL? Is that really his best role? Is that where we want Scream to be, or do we want him just kind of like, you know, brain off, gun out, shooting people? And who's going to be the primary operator? Is it going to be Navera? Because none of the XMS, Shin, or News Era are you know chamber jet
I
players
would think it
particularly.
probably will be.
So that's a totally kind of new position for Navarro to be in also. I definitely can see this team having some pretty serious growing pains. But if we're just talking about, you know, like the marketing side, because I think that is worth talking about, like the marketing side of constructing a roster. I mean, I can't think of anyone else, any pickups that are better than the Scream Navarro combo for a French org to get. So I think, you know, kind of like an A for that. But as far as role construction, I don't know. I'm kind of sitting in like a C grade or something like that there.
Yeah.
Okay, Giants Gaming. Giants Gaming. This is sort of an interesting team. It's almost like the players that didn't make it into some of like the bigger clout orgs, in my
Hmm.
opinion. But that's not to take anything away from them. We've got a roster of Hoodie, Nuki, Cloud, Rhyme, and Fatinho, with Pipson as the coach. Tell me about this team, TMV.
Well, Hoodie and Nuki were probably G2's best players. With
Hmm.
Nuki, I mean, Nuki's probably a top 20 player in the world.
Yeah.
Uh, he's just insane, to be honest. So, like, that is a good start, right? You bring in anyone who was gonna get Nuki, I was gonna be like, good addition, good job. That's a good get. And Cloud as well. I talked about Navi. Maybe could have stuck with their old team, some pieces of it. Cloud would have been in those one of those pieces that they would have built around. That's like definitely good enough to be playing in tier 1. Uh,
Yep.
Fatinho is the one kind of holdover from before. I remember back when they were Vodafone Giants then, and they were actually doing pretty well in EMEA for a while, and they were like competing with like the top teams for a while. And Fatinho was on that team. It was when they had some of the old G2 guys as well, like Meadow and stuff, I think as well. And Fatinho, he didn't look out of place back then. It's been a while since that time. But at that time, kind of, late-ish 2021, like mid to late 2021, when they were competing, like Fatinho fit in. He didn't look out of place with the top players. So it's kind of like if he can, get back to that level, uh, they have a chance. Again, I do kind of agree with you that it feels like maybe a bit of like a mismatch of like who's like the best people we can get. Oh, this guy's taken. Other
Hmm.
than Nuki, I guess, who I would put in like the top tier. But other than that, yeah, I would put them a step below the Vitalities, the Kois, maybe in there with kind of Heretics. I think it's an okay get, and if this team didn't have Nuki, I'd be like, what are you selling us on?
Right.
But Nuki is kind of the saving grace, I think, of this roster, where you can go, okay, we have a top player in the world, and if he's popping off, we could maybe do some damage.
Totally. So I was looking at the players individually, and you know how there's sort of like this meme in the Korean teams of, oh, they just grab every Jet player and then turn them into
That's
the
true.
roles that they need.
Yeah.
This team, four of their players have Raze as their like first or second
Yeah.
most played agent. So
Yeah.
they got all the Raze players, and I'm very curious to see what the roles shake out here. Also, I will say Spanish org, they do have one Spanish player, so they get
Yeah.
a little bit of props for that.
I mean, there's so
Um,
many Spanish orgs. Why is there so many Spanish orgs?
I mean, apparently the game is huge there. I guess we'll
Yeah,
see.
but 3?
I
Crazy.
know.
Crazy.
Um, Rhyme probably will be the IGL coming
Hmm.
back from North America, where
Hmm.
he played for Gen G.
Yeah.
Um,
So you probably
that
know
will be
more about him.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I remember him when he was playing like, I mean, he's pretty flexible. He ended up playing some of the Rays, but also is sort of like a sentinel type player. So I
Hmm.
think that won't be a conflict. But again, we've seen like the personality of Nuki versus like any other IGL that he's on
Hmm.
team with.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting to watch whether this roster is the same, in my opinion,
Yeah.
in a couple of
I
months.
could see that. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Foot Esports, Turkish org.
Hmm. So they have mostly kept it the same from their team at the VRLs. They added in Ata Kaptan. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't watched that guy play. Don't know if he's good or not. But everything else, they kept the four of the players that they already had. A lot of people probably have gonna never watched this team play. They kept it together. I think that makes sense. Obviously, they're a Turkish org. They won the VRLs, and I will
Mhm.
say that they won the VRLs when like the old Vitality roster looked like the best team on paper, in that tournament, and Foot managed to beat them and come back from a 2-0 deficit in a best of 5 and win 3-2. So I can understand them mostly wanting to keep it together. I think the big thing for both the Turkish rosters obviously is everyone wanted them from like a GM perspective. Everyone wanted the Turkish rosters. Just one of you get CNED, so that then
Right.
you have like like we've got a superstar player, right? We've got the best Turkish player, because now both CNED and Alfia, who are the best two Turkish players, aren't playing for the Turkish orgs. And so it just
Right.
the whole thing just feels a bit like, is this, I mean, we could add BBL into this as well. It's just like, I don't think they're bad, but it's like, is that like, you've lost your two best players that like you should have access to as the Turkish orgs. You don't have them. And so it's kind of like, eh, eh.
Right. Yeah, it is kind of an interesting thing with, I mean, obviously, if we're talking purely from like a fan perspective, if you're a fan in Turkey, you
Mhm,
probably want to watch Turkish players. So
mhm,
your two orgs are both full Turkish rosters, at least from what we can tell. That's great.
mhm,
You get to cheer for people from your home country. That being said, I think if you're going to just stick with only Turkish players in the long run, you're gonna eventually be at a pretty big disadvantage because you just have such a smaller like talent pool to pull from, right?
mhm.
We're talking about some of these teams that are like in North America, for example, that are pulling people from overseas. We've got
Yeah,
the Fnatic roster, which has players from all over the place. We've got same thing with Koi and even Heretics, like Vitality. Not too many overlapping um, countries as far as the players'
mhm,
origins, and so I do worry a bit about the Turkish orgs not straying from the path. But at the same time, if language is an issue and you want to really just appeal
yeah,
to your home crowd, I can understand keeping the same roster that you're comfortable with, and it does definitely give you a bit of an advantage going into the next season if everybody else is shuffling and you have the same players that have been playing together
yeah,
for the last like year and a half. Um, you certainly could have a leg up as far as the early stages, but as far as the peak, I hate to say it, but I'm probably putting both Foot and BBL in like the bottom 3.
mm,
And I know that's probably going to get a lot of hate from the Turkish fans that are watching, but it's I don't really know if there's enough like high-powered Turkish talent to compete against the teams that are pulling from all the countries, you know?
yeah. I think the problem with the two Turkish orgs is, and yeah, we can just add BBL into this because they've pretty much done the same, where they're
Right.
mostly keeping it the same. Is their ceiling to me is like fifth
Mhm.
best. Like that to me is the problem. That I can make a case for Vitality, maybe even Giants. Nuki just pops off. Koi. I can make a case, right? K Corp even, right? Like Screaming Navera and these other players are just better than we think, and they just go crazy, right? I can like see a world in for all these other teams where if everything goes right, they can like legitimately be competing at the very top. Problem is for the Turkish orgs, I feel like for as the team that won the VRL, could they compete with like the other tier one orgs of like last year? Yeah, they could probably compete, but would they often win? That I have doubts about. So it just feels like the ceiling. There's a big limit on the ceiling for both Foot and BBL. Where I just feel like without like one of these players potentially becoming a superstar, you know, like an alpha year, that just comes out of nowhere. Unless they do bring in someone who is just like another alpha year. Maybe it's possible. Who knows? But without that, I just don't. I don't know. I just don't feel like the ceiling is that high, and so yeah, I'd probably have to agree with you on where they kind of stand overall. We'll have to see.
Cool. Okay, well, let's move on to Fnatic. I think we're kind of both sold on the BBL as well, so we don't
Mm-hmm.
really need to talk about them too much. Fnatic goes out and they add Chronicle to their roster. They also pick up Leo. So the roster is Alfier, Chronicle, Leo, Boaster, and Durka. Mini staying on as the coach. Mystic obviously being the one who is out, and then Enzo as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Fnatic, do they have what it takes to finally get themselves a title in EMEA this year?
You'd hope so, because if they don't, like, this is the thing, right? With Fnatic and their roster, it's like, okay, we'll keep Boaster and Durka. Let's add in someone else. Okay, we got Alfia. Okay, this kid's correct. Like, let's go for him. okay, we need to add 2 more superstars, right? Let's just build a team of 5 superstars. And that's what they've done. Problem is, if this doesn't work, where do they go?
Right.
What do they do? If they don't, right, let's say even like the worst case scenario, right? Like they don't even make like a top 8 at Sao Paulo and they bomb
Yikes.
out and then like they continue to struggle. What on earth do they do? Who do they blame? Because all of these players are superstars in their own right. You know, they're all like top players. I mean, what you at one point, Chronicle was considered the best player in the world. Durka has been considered the best player in the world. Althea has shown himself to be, you know, perhaps one of the best young players in the world. Could potentially be the best player in the world at one point. Leo has shown himself to be one of the best initiators in the world. And you got Boaster, who's one of the best IGLs in the world. So if it doesn't work, what on earth are you going to do next? And that is, to me, like, and that's the thing, right? Obviously, you can't think like that. Fnatic will be thinking, we're just going to win everything because our team is better than everyone else's team. And that might be true. But I will be super interested if it doesn't go right, you know, because we've seen it, you know, in sports or in other esports, people build a super team and then they don't do as well as they thought. And then it all just quickly collapses because there is a lot of expectation and there's going to be a lot of pressure. You know, Fnatic need to win. You know, if they don't finish top 4 Sao Paulo, there's going to be massive questions asked in that building of like, what do we need to do next to make sure this team wins? Because they, at this point, have pretty much thrown it all there. In terms of a GM, like roster construction thing, yeah, look, you found 2 superstars to come into your team. Like, obviously it's good. There is no doubt that it's good. But if it doesn't go well for them, it's going to be entertaining, I think, from the outside. Maybe not on the inside.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if they're not in the top 3 in EMEA, I mean, honestly, if they're not even in the top 2, I feel like it just ends up having to be, you have to look at like the overall macro of how the team is run at that point.
Yeah.
Just because the talent is there.
You can't blame the players. Yeah, because the players are good. They're all just good.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, hats off to the Fnatic management team for putting together. Honestly, if I'm looking at this, I would say this is probably top to bottom. Oh man, then I look at the Navi roster.
No, I would say that talent-wise, like individual player-wise, I think Fnatic are 1. I think Fnatic are 1 in terms of the individual players. Navi have the advantage of having like the core of a team already there. But like, if every player was if we were just ranking positions of every player in the world, I think Fnatic's lowest player would be the highest of any of the teams.
Yeah, I think there's maybe some argument for Boaster as far as just like consistency and overall IGLing, but as not being like the number 1 in his position, but it's certainly close, and everybody else is definitely there. So you know, I'm expecting great things from Fnatic. Show me what you got in 2023 is all I have to say.
Yeah.
Hey, it's me from the future, and hopefully you enjoyed that first part of what ended up being a 2-hour show with me and TMV. We decided to split it up into 2 parts just because it was so long. So the first part was EMEA, and this second part is going to be both the Americas and the Pacific region. So enjoy the rest of the show.
This is, a really, really interesting one. I don't think anyone predicted Sassy and Pancada going from Loud to Sentinels. Sentinels' clout would have gone from number 1 to like number 5 or 6 very quickly if Tens was off this roster, in my opinion. You know, you got the mix of the anti-clout in Xset, so you keep Tens, you bring in the Loud guys, you get the Brazilian clout as well. They keep the clout.
NRG, the other highly clouded org, going pretty big with their free agent signings. So we've got essentially Optic plus Artists plus Som.
When I did my power rankings of the thing, I put them in S tier and my Twitch chat was going mad. Like, oh, they're not S tier, and I don't get it at all. The rest of Optic seem to have that bit of like, you know, cockiness to them of like, we are the best. And Ye was just kind of there, happy, smiling along. Like, Artists like fits that, right? They are going to make themselves like the villains and, you know, make themselves like, we know we're better than you. We are going to stomp you.